On the morning of February 1887, a shepherd walked into the Mogollon Rim country of Arizona Territory, herding his flock across an invisible line that separated cattle range from sheep range. By sunset, he was dead shot, his body buried where he fell. That single killing would trigger a decade-long war that left between 35 and 50 people dead across Pleasant Valley, making it the bloodiest range conflict in United States history. The violence was so systematic, men ambushed while tending horses, bodies left unburied for hours while gunmen stood guard. A 12-year-old boy testifying at a coroner's inquest about watching his father murdered that it convinced the United States Congress Arizona Territory was too lawless for statehood, delaying admission to the Union for 25 years. But this wasn't about cattle versus sheep, though that played a part. This wasn't even about land or water rights, though both families fought over those too. This was about something darker. Two families, the Tewksburys and the Grahams, bound together by friendship and torn apart by accusations of cattle rustling, who transformed a personal betrayal into a war of annihilation that nearly wiped out every adult male in both families. The Tewksburys were part Native American. The Grahams were Irish immigrants. Both started as cattlemen. Both were friends. And both, according to court records and historical accounts, were accused of cattle rustling. Not enemies turned thieves, but partners in theft who fell out over dividing stolen livestock. If you have the courage to hear this story of ambushes documented in coroner's inquests, of a woman forced to bury her husband while gunmen watched and hogs approached the corpse, of a sheriff who killed 3 men in under 60 seconds, then stay with me. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on verified court records, witness testimony, and historical documents. This is the Pleasant Valley War, and there are no heroes here. Pleasant Valley sits in northern Gila County, Arizona, overshadowed by the Mogollon Rim, a massive escarpment that runs 200 miles across Arizona before merging into the White Mountains. At Baker's Butte, the rim rises to nearly 8,000 feet, creating a dramatic divide between high country and desert below. Atop the Mogollon, the land was pine bunch grass and buffalo clover, interspersed with Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, and oak. Mountain streams rushed through canyon bottoms lined with willows, slowed by beaver dams holding pools of native trout, turkey, deer, and bear black, brown, and silvertip roamed the mountains. Mountain lions hunted the ridges, the smell pine resin sharp in cold air, wood smoke from cabin chimneys, horse manure and cattle in corrals, the sounds wind through ponderosa pines making that distinctive whistle, creek water over stone, elk bugling in autumn. At night, the silence so complete you could hear a horse whinny 2 miles away. Pleasant Valley was connected to the outside world only by trails. Prescott, the county seat where the law resided, was 3 days' hard ride away, roughly 100 miles through mountains and desert. In Pleasant Valley, you were on your own. District Attorney G.W. Shute warned, strangers entering the Pleasant Valley disappeared completely. Horse thieves infested the whole of the country. A cattleman or farmer, when he turned his horses upon the range, never knew whether or not he would see them again. Between 1883 and 1888, about 24 households participated as complainants, defendants, or witnesses in about 30 court hearings. The law was just as much a problem used as a weapon to intimidate neighbors through lawsuits and accusations. This was the world the Tewksburys and Grahams entered. James D. Tewksbury was a former miner from San Francisco who married a Native American woman whose name history did not preserve. They had 4 sons, John, Jim, Ed, and Frank. One daughter, Edwin Tewksbury, born 1858, was the second son. He would become the family's most effective fighter and its sole survivor. The Tewksbury boys, half Native American, faced racism in a territory where that heritage carried stigma. Ed was often mistaken for being black. Later, there would be a bounty $50 for a Tewksbury scalp, turning racist language into literal violence. They called their place the Flying V. John Tewkesbury Sr.'s cabin still stands today, an 1880 log structure with gun ports cut into the walls, preserved at the Pioneer Living History Museum in Phoenix. Those ports weren't decorative. They were necessary. Daily life at the Flying V wake before dawn. Feed horses. Check cattle scattered across the valley. Hunt deer for winter meat. They ate salt pork, beans, biscuits, coffee, venison when they could get it. The cabin smelled like wood smoke, leather, and livestock. At night, kerosene lamps. In winter, so cold your breath frosted inside until the stove got going. The Tewkesbury boys were known as capable cowboys. According to family accounts, they'd worked on the Graham ranch doing odd jobs, herding cattle, cowboying, friends, before they became enemies. The Grahams came from Ireland. Samuel Graham migrated to Ohio in 1851 with his wife Jane and their 5 children. Jane died in 1861. Sam remarried, fathering 7 more children. In 1881, John and Thomas Graham staked claims in Arizona Territory after being invited by Ed Tewkesbury himself. Tom Graham and John D. Tewkesbury started out as friends. According to one manuscript, the Grahams and Tewkesburys immediately became good friends, and through devious means and questionable tactics, a sizable herd of cattle was acquired in partnership, all branded TE Connected. Devious means, questionable tactics. Both families, it appears, built their herds through cattle rustling. Together, partners in crime before they became partners in murder. Picture them, Ed Tewkesbury and Tom Graham riding together, working cattle, sharing meals, building trust, building friendship, building the knowledge of each other's weaknesses that would make them such effective enemies later. A photograph exists of them together. Tom is on the left, Ed on his right. Both men look hard, weathered, competent, men shaped by the Arizona frontier. James Stinson was a big cattleman with a big herd. His operation dominated Pleasant Valley, and Stinson had a problem. His cattle kept disappearing. He accused both families of rustling. Given what we know about the TE Connected brand and devious means, his accusations probably had merit. In 1884, Stinson made a deal with the Grahams. According to court records, Stinson would pay each Graham 50 head of cattle and guarantee they'd never serve jail time if they turned state's evidence against the Tewkesburys. The Grahams took the deal. John Graham immediately filed a complaint with District Attorney Charles B. Rush, accusing the Tewkesbury family of rebranding over 60 of Stinson's cattle. This was betrayal at its purest, accusing your partners in crime to save yourself. The Tewkesburys were forced to travel to Prescott to face charges. The case was thrown out for lack of evidence after the judge discovered Stinson's deal with the Grahams. But damage was done. On the journey home, young Frank Tewkesbury, 22 years old, contracted measles, sleeping on cold, damp ground. The measles turned to pneumonia. He died. The Tewkesbury family blamed Stinson and the Grahams for Frank's death. When the Tewkesbury boys told their father they suspected the Grahams of stealing stray cows and changing brands using a riding iron, Old Man Tewkesbury forbade his sons from associating with the Grahams. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Both families were likely guilty of cattle rustling. The Grahams betrayed partners in crime to save themselves. The Tewkesburys were angry at being accused of crimes they probably committed. There are no heroes here, just men in a lawless territory where survival sometimes meant theft, and where the line between victim and criminal was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. For the next 3 years, the tension simmered. The families avoided each other, spread rumors, built alliances, accumulated grievances like kindling, waiting for a match. And in February 1887, that match was struck not with an argument or a punch, but with a gunshot in the high country and a body left where it fell. In 1887, the Tewkesburys made a business decision that would have murderous consequences. They agreed to bring sheep into Pleasant Valley. The sheep belonged to the Daggs brothers of Flagstaff P. and R.E. Daggs, who ran a large sheep operation north of the Mogollon Rim. They hired the Tewksburys to move sheep south across the rim into Pleasant Valley's grasslands. P. Daggs later wrote, "It cost me enough, $90,000. A staggering sum, roughly $2.7 million today, suggesting the violence that followed cost him dearly in lost sheep, lost business, and blood money paid to widows and lawyers." The Mogollon Rim had become more than a geographic feature. It was a boundary, a deadline as the cattlemen called it, the line across which sheep were forbidden to cross. This wasn't written law. This was range law, the kind enforced by rifles and reputation. Cattlemen hated sheep with an intensity that bordered on religious fervor. The reasoning sheep pull grass out by the roots while grazing, destroying the range for cattle. Whether this was scientifically accurate or range mythology didn't matter. Cattlemen believed it, and belief justifies violence. One account describes cattlemen watching the line of white woolly maggots snake their way along the rim. That language, woolly maggots, tells you everything about how they viewed sheep. Not as livestock, not as property, as infestation, as disease, as something to be eliminated. And in February 1887, the Tewksburys crossed the deadline. February along the Mogollon Rim cold. Daytime temperatures might reach the 50s if you were lucky, drop into the 30s or below at night. Patches of snow still clung to north-facing slopes. The ponderosa pines stood dark against winter sky. Creek water ran fast with snowmelt, ice forming at the edges overnight. A shepherd Navajo or Basque, sources conflict on his identity, moved with his flock across the high country. Sheep bells tinkling, his dog working the edges. Maybe he had a fire going when he stopped, coffee brewing in a battered pot. Maybe he saw the rider approaching. Maybe he didn't. What we know for certain. In February 1887, a shepherd employed by the Tewksburys was shot and killed near the Mogollon Rim. His body was buried where he fell. That's what we can state with certainty. What follows is where historical accounts diverge, where oral tradition and documented fact blur together, where the truth becomes as contested as the range itself. Account 1. The victim was a Navajo Indian. Tom Graham shot him, then beheaded the corpse, burying it in a shallow grave. The beheading wasn't just murder, it was desecration, a message written in blood and tissue. Account 2. The victim was a Basque sheep herder. Several cowboys ambushed the shepherds and shot and beheaded a Basque sheep herder, plural cowboys. Not just Tom Graham, collective violence, shared guilt. Account 3. The victim was shot and killed, buried where he fell, no mention of beheading at all. Simple murder, if murder can ever be simple. The problem. No primary source documentation exists, no coroner's report, no court case, no witness testimony under oath. The killing happened in the wilderness, witnessed only by the killer and the killed couldn't testify. Why does it matter if he was Navajo or Basque? Because it tells us whose life Arizona Territory bothered to record. His name, Navajo or Basque, doesn't appear in any historical account I found. He died. His body was left in the mountains, and history didn't care enough to preserve his identity. Why does the beheading matter? Because if true, it reveals Tom Graham as capable of extraordinary brutality, the kind that announces itself, that demands to be witnessed even after the fact. If false, it reveals how violence gets embellished in the telling, how reputation and reality diverge, how a man can be transformed into a monster through whispers and fear. Imagine the moment a shepherd alone with his flock in the high country, the crack of a rifle echoing off canyon walls. He falls. Perhaps he dies instantly. Brain and bone matter scattering across February snow. Perhaps he lies there, bleeding into the dirt, watching the sky fade, feeling the cold creep in from his extremities toward his heart. If the beheading happened, imagine that the calculated brutality, the time it would take, the saw of blade against vertebrae, The message written in the deliberate desecration of a corpse. If it didn't, imagine instead just the cold efficiency shoot. Bury shallow. Leave. Either version tells a story about what men become when law is 3 days away and rage is immediate. What we do know: this killing triggered everything that followed. Historical accounts state, this event began the bloody battle responsible for 19 known deaths and as many as 30. One man dead in February. By year's end, at least a dozen more would follow. No one was arrested. No investigation launched. The sheriff in Prescott, 100 miles and 3 days away, may not have even been informed. In Pleasant Valley, justice was whatever you could enforce yourself. The law was a distant abstraction. Violence was immediate and real. When word reached the Tewksbury Ranch, something calcified. The feud had been lawsuits and accusations, stolen cattle and broken trust. Now it was bodies. Now it was blood in the snow. Now it demanded an answer written in the same language. For this documentary, I present what's verified. A shepherd was shot and killed. Some accounts claim he was beheaded. Tom Graham's signature brutality becoming legend. Others omit this detail entirely. Primary sources don't exist to confirm either way. What matters is what the Tewksburys believed. And they believed Tom Graham had murdered their employee, sent a message written in blood, and gotten away with it because the law didn't care about a dead Navajo or a dead Basque in the mountains where sheep weren't supposed to be. Belief in Pleasant Valley was enough to kill for, from February to August 1887, 6 months of escalating tension, threats exchanged in town and on trails, weapons acquired, cleaned, loaded, alliances formed through kinship and proximity and shared enemies. Men who'd been neutral forced to choose sides because neutrality became impossible when every man you passed might be your killer tomorrow. The Blevins family arrived in the valley and aligned with the Grahams. Martin Blevins, called Mart, brought his sons Hampton, Andy, John, Sam Houston, Charles, another family to feed the fire. Tom Horn, legendary scout, hired killer with a reputation written in Apache blood, may have arrived too, though which side employed him remains debated by historians. His autobiography mentions the Pleasant Valley War, calls it a big rustler war, and notes the rustlers were getting the best of the game. By August, Pleasant Valley was a powder keg, families choosing sides, men riding with rifles across their saddles instead of in scabbards. Every encounter a potential trigger. All it needed was another spark. And on August 9th, 1887, that spark came at a place called the Middleton Ranch. The Blevins family had arrived in Pleasant Valley in 1884 and immediately aligned with the Grahams. They were a large family patriarch, Martin Blevins, called Mart, and his sons Andy, John, Hampton called Hamp, Charles, and Sam Houston, cattle ranchers, cowboys, men with reputations as fighters. In August 1887, Mart Blevins went out searching for missing horses. He suspected the Tewksburys were behind the theft, probably correctly given what we know about cattle and horse rustling in the valley. He never returned. His horse and rifle were recovered near the Tewksbury Ranch. His body was never found. Somewhere in Pleasant Valley, buried in a shallow grave, hidden in a canyon, left for scavengers, Mart Blevins remained. His sons would search for years. They never found him. Tom Horn, the hired killer, became one of the prime suspects. Horn had arrived in Pleasant Valley in April 1887, claiming in his autobiography, early in April of 1887, some of the boys came down from the Pleasant Valley, where there was a big rustler war going on, and the rustlers were getting the best of the game. Did Horn kill Mart Blevins for the Tewksburys? Did someone else? Did Mart die of natural causes or accident in the wilderness? And someone simply took his horse and rifle? The answer was buried with his body, wherever that is. What matters is what the Blevins family believed. They believed the Tewksburys murdered their father. And in Pleasant Valley, belief was sufficient for revenge. Mart Blevins' disappearance transformed the feud. Before, It was the Tewkesburys versus the Grahams. Now, it was the Tewkesburys versus the Grahams and the Blevinses, a larger, angrier, more violent coalition. The Blevins boys began hunting for their father's killers, and in their grief and rage, they stopped distinguishing between Tewkesburys and anyone associated with them. August 9th, 1887, the Middleton Ranch, 2 miles south of Kew Ranch in Pleasant Valley. A faction of the Tewkesburys was visiting the Middleton cabin, likely Jim and Ed Tewkesbury, possibly others. Maybe they were eating breakfast salt pork, biscuits, coffee boiled until it was thick enough to stand a spoon in, maybe playing cards, maybe just talking about the coming autumn, about whether they'd survive it. Around midday, riders approached. The Graham faction, Hampton Blevins, John Payne, Tom Tucker, and others. They'd been searching for Mark Blevins since dawn, looking for answers, looking for revenge, looking for anyone to blame. August heat, temperatures climbing into the 90s even in the shade, horses lathered with sweat, men tired, hungry, angry. The kind of combination that turns questions into accusations, accusations into violence. The exchange that followed has entered Western legend. The Graham faction called out, "We need food, been riding since dawn." The Tewkesbury response came through the cabin door. This is not a boarding house. A moment of silence. A moment where it could have gone different, where Hamp could have said fair enough and ridden on, where pride could have bent just enough to prevent what came next. Instead, someone reached for a gun. Who drew first accounts differ. Who fired first lost to history. What matters is that in that moment of heat and hunger and accumulated rage, violence became inevitable. The shooting began. Hampton Blevins and John Payne were killed. The rest of the Graham faction fled, some wounded, blood trailing from saddles, leaving their dead where they fell. 2 men dead in the dirt outside the Middleton cabin. Gun smoke hanging in the August heat, acrid and thick. Blood soaking into dust that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Horses screaming, rearing, trying to escape the gunfire. Hamp Blevins dying in that dust, knowing he'd never see his father again, never know what happened to him. John Payne already dead, eyes open to the Arizona sky. The survivors scattered, rode hard. They spread the word, the Tewkesburys just killed Hamp and John. The war is on. Choose your side. 8 days later, August 17th, 1887. William Graham died. He was 18 years old. But who killed him? That's where the historical record fractures into competing narratives, each with evidence, each with problems, each impossible to fully verify or dismiss. Account 1. William Graham was gunned down at his home and lived long enough to identify Ed Tewkesbury as the shooter. The scene as reported William shot, mortally wounded. The bullet tore through his abdomen, catastrophic damage to intestines and organs. He managed to ride away, back toward his home, but his wound was so severe that when he arrived, his intestines were hanging from his belly. Imagine that ride, every movement of the horse sending fresh agony through his destroyed core, blood soaking his shirt, his pants, dripping onto the saddle, the taste of copper in his mouth, the growing cold despite the August heat. He looks up at his family, his brothers, and with whatever strength remains, names his killer, Ed Tewkesbury. Ed shot me. Then he dies, 18 years old, dead for being born a Graham. Account 2, Apache County Deputy Sheriff James D. Hacker Tewkesbury ally confessed that he was the man who shot William Graham after he mistook him for his brother John Graham. Hook's version. He was waiting to arrest John Graham on some charge now lost to history. William appeared instead. Hook was massively drunk, fired from 40 yards distance, hit William by mistake thinking he was shooting at John, a deputy sheriff, drunk on duty, killing a teenager by mistake, then confessing, or claiming to confess, to protect Ed Tewkesbury from murder charges. Many people in Pleasant Valley believed this was just a ruse to keep the allegations away from Ed Tewkesbury, a story designed to muddy the waters, to create reasonable doubt, to protect the Tewkesbury's most effective killer. A jury found Tewkesbury guilty in his absence. Sheriff Mulvernon set out to arrest Ed, but he had already fled into the hills. Ed Tewkesbury knew every canyon, every hiding place, every cave and crevice in those mountains. He could vanish like smoke. The law couldn't find him, which tells you everything about law enforcement in Pleasant Valley. An 18-year-old boy shot to death, his killer publicly identified by name as he died, and the only response is a manhunt that fails within days. The truth we'll never know. If Ed Tewkesbury killed William Graham, he shot a teenager, barely an adult, guilty only of being born a Graham. Murder of the most cold-blooded kind. If James Houck killed William by mistake while drunk, a deputy sheriff caused a death that further inflamed the war, then may have lied about it to protect a friend or faction. Manslaughter at minimum. Conspiracy to obstruct justice at worst. Either way, William Graham died for his family name, and his death guaranteed more deaths would follow, because the Grahams could not let this stand. After William Graham's death, the Graham and Blevins factions made a decision. The Tewkesburys had to be eliminated, not arrested, not driven from the valley. Eliminated, wiped out. Every adult male killed so the feud would die with them. On September 2nd, 1887, they put that plan into action at the Tewkesbury Ranch, and what happened there, documented in a coroner's inquest, testified to by a 12-year-old boy who watched his stepfather die, was one of the most brutal episodes in the entire war. What happened at the Tewkesbury Ranch on September 2nd, 1887? We know with unusual certainty because a 12-year-old boy witnessed it and later testified under oath at the coroner's inquest. His name was Thomas Schultes. He was John Tewkesbury's stepson. And this is what he saw. Thomas Schultes, age 12, testified, was at corral back of house when firing commenced. Shots struck near me. While running to house, about 4 bullets struck near me, some as near as 2 feet. Saw smoke from bushes about 1/4 mile distant. Saw bodies of deceased and helped cover them. Saw no bullet wounds. Shots were all from one direction. Deceased had no guns near them when found, but had 45-90 Winchester rifles, also revolver, and 2 belts of cartridges apiece when last seen alive. Another witness testified, found bodies 3 days afterwards. Thought saw bullet wound in back of John Tewkesbury. Covered bodies with blanket and sent for assistance. Deceased had guns, pistols and cartridges when last seen. Had no other valuables. Left house to hunt for horses. Shots all day near house at intervals from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. 8 hours. They fired at the cabin for 8 hours. John Tewkesbury, the patriarch, and William Jacobs. Both shot down as they went to gather horses. Unarmed at the moment of death, though they'd been carrying rifles and revolvers when they left the cabin. Ambushed. Killed. Their bodies left in the open. Inside the cabin, Lydia Tewkesbury, John's wife. Her 2 small boys, Parker Tewkesbury, age 6, and Walter Tewkesbury, age 3, Thomas Schultes, age 12. Imagine being those children, hearing the gunshots that killed your father, the bullets punching through the cabin walls for hours, your mother trying to keep you quiet, keep you safe, knowing your father's body is lying in the yard and there's nothing she can do. Early morning, September 2nd, 1887. Temperature probably in the 50s. Warming quickly. Clear sky. John Tewkesbury and William Jacobs step out of the cabin. Normal morning. Feed the horses. Check the stock. From the tree line, 1/4 mile away. Multiple rifles fire. John falls first. Jacobs tries to run. More shots. He goes down. Inside the cabin screaming. Children crying. Lydia Tewkesbury at the window, watching her husband die, unable to help. Thomas Schultes running from the corral, bullets striking within 2 feet of him, close enough to feel the air displacement, close enough to hear that distinctive crack as lead breaks the sound barrier past your head. For 8 hours the crack of rifles, bullets hitting the cabin walls, splinters flying, the smell of gun smoke drifting through the air, the sun climbing, heat building, The bodies lying in the sun, flies gathering, blood turning black in the dust. Here's where it gets medieval. As the siege continued, hogs began approaching the bodies. In Pleasant Valley, hogs ran semi-wild, and a corpse was food. The Grahams did not offer a truce. They watched, waited, let the hogs come closer. Finally, after 8 hours of shooting, Lydia Tewkesbury made a decision. She came out of the cabin with a shovel. Picture it. A woman walking out into the open where 2 men have just been shot. The Graham gunmen hidden in the brush. Rifles trained on her. Her husband's body in the dirt. Hogs nearby. She begins to dig. The Grahams stopped firing. They let her bury her husband. Even men capable of murdering from ambush, of guarding corpses for hogs to mutilate, had a line they wouldn't cross. They let her dig. They let her bury. Then they rode away. When Jim Tewkesbury heard what happened to his brother John, he said, "No damned man can kill a brother of mine and stand guard over him for the hogs to eat him and live within 1.5 miles of me." That wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and Jim Tewkesbury kept his promises. Andy Blevins, also known by the alias Andy Cooper, returned to Holbrook, Arizona. He'd just helped kill 2 men. He felt untouchable, and in a saloon, drinking, he made a fatal error. He bragged about it. Multiple witnesses heard him. Word spread, reached the wrong ears, specifically Sheriff Commodore Perry Owens. Commodore Perry Owens was 35 years old that September. Born in Tennessee, ran away from home at 13, became a buffalo hunter, learned to shoot from the hip, learned to shoot with either hand. By 1887, he was sheriff of Apache County, responsible for 21,177 square miles of territory. Witnesses described him shoulder-length blonde hair, steel grey eyes, wore his pistol cross-draw fashion. He could accurately shoot 1 pistol in each hand. He'd earned his reputation. Some said he'd helped finish the Clanton gang after the OK Corral. Others said he'd killed a Navajo boy in 1883, an incident that had him arrested but acquitted. Legal or not, people knew Commodore Perry Owens was dangerous. Owens had a warrant for Andy Cooper, Andy Blevins' alias. The charge stealing 25 horses from a Mormon who had tracked his horses to the Blevins Canyon Creek Ranch and identified Andy. But Owens had ignored that warrant for months. Some said because Owens and Blevins were friends, had been cowboys together. Others said Owens was afraid of Blevins, known as a fine shot and a cold killer. But when Owens heard Blevins bragging about murdering the Tewkesbury men, he decided it was time to serve that warrant. Sunday afternoon, September 4th, 1887. The Blevins family cottage in Holbrook. 12 people inside Andy Blevins, his brothers John and Sam Houston Blevins, their mother, Mrs. Blevins, John's wife Eva and their infant son, family friend Miss Amanda Gladden, house guest Moses Roberts called Mose, and several children. They were in the midst of Sunday dinner, the smell of cooking meat, family gathered. Normal Sunday afternoon, approximately 4 o'clock. Commodore Perry Owens approaches the cottage, alone, cradling his Winchester rifle in his arm. He knocks on the door. Andy Blevins answers with a pistol in hand. Owens, Andy Blevins. "I'm Sheriff Owens. I have a warrant for your arrest. Come out of the house." "Andy, I ain't going nowhere with you." "Owens." Andy tries to close the door. Owens drops the rifle to his hip and shoots Blevins through the door, hitting him in the abdomen. Andy falls backward into the house, gut shot, dying. John Blevins comes to the front door, fires a shot at Owens with a rifle. The bullet misses. Owens pivots, fires. John hit in the shoulder, staggers back. Moses Roberts grabs a pistol, runs to the door. Owens turns, fires. A rifle shot to the head. Roberts dead instantly. Sam Houston Blevins, who had no criminal record, grabs Andy's gun, aims at Owens through a window. Owens sees the movement, fires, shot to the heart. Sam Houston Blevins dead before he hits the floor. Duration, less than 1 minute. Some sources say 20 seconds. Shots fired by Owens, 5 shots total. Dead Andy Blevins, Moses Roberts, Sam Houston Blevins. wounded John Blevins, survived this encounter but would be killed later. Owens uninjured, not a scratch. Inside that cottage, Mrs. Blevins watching her sons die. Eva Blevins trying to help her wounded husband while holding their infant. Children screaming. Miss Amanda Gladden in shock. Blood everywhere. Gun smoke thick in the air, acrid and choking. 4 men down in under a minute. A Sunday dinner turned into a slaughterhouse. 3 separate coroner's juries were convened, 1 for each death. All 3 ruled the killings self-defense. Owens was not indicted. The cases were never prosecuted, but Owens lost his position as sheriff. The killings were legal, but the politics weren't. People were horrified not at the violence necessarily, but at the efficiency. At a man who could kill 3 people and wound a 4th in under a minute. Was Owens justified legally? Yes. He had a warrant. Andy Blevins was armed. John fired first. Roberts grabbed a gun. Sam was aiming at him. But consider Sam Houston. Blevins had no criminal record. He was in his family's home on a Sunday afternoon when a sheriff showed up and shot his brother through the door. He grabbed a gun to defend his family. For that, he got a bullet in the heart. Was Owens a hero enforcing the law, or was he a killer who used a warrant as an excuse to eliminate the Graham faction? Both things can be true simultaneously. The Owens-Blevins shootout made national news, but in Pleasant Valley, it was just another Sunday, and the killing wasn't done. The Owens-Blevins shootout made headlines across Arizona territory. 3 men dead in a sheriff's gunfight. Before that, the Tewksbury Ranch siege. Before that, the Middleton Ranch shootout. Before that, William Graham shot to death at 18. The body count was accelerating. And finally, someone in a position of authority decided to act. Governor Conrad Meyer Zulick, Arizona. Territorial governor from 1885 to 1889, gave direct orders to Sheriff William Mulvannon of Prescott end this war. September 10th, 1887. Sheriff Mulvannon left Prescott with a posse. They rode 100 miles through mountains and desert toward Pleasant Valley. His mission: arrest everyone involved, restore order, end the killing. There was one problem. His posse included Tewksbury allies, James D. Houck, the deputy sheriff who'd confessed, or lied about confessing, to killing William Graham, reinforced the posse at Hagler Ranch. 6 others joined, several known to support the Tewksburys. This wasn't law enforcement. This was one armed faction with badges hunting the other armed faction. September 22nd, 1887. Perkins store in Young, Arizona, heart of Pleasant Valley. Sheriff Mulvannon's posse found John Graham and Charles Blevins at the Perkins store. John Graham, Tom's brother, one of the original Graham brothers who'd come to Arizona after Ed Tewksbury invited them. Charles Blevins, another son of the missing Mark Blevins, brother to the dead Hamp, Andy, and Sam Houston. The posse hid themselves behind a stone wall and waited. As John Graham and Charles Blevins approached the store, the posse emerged. Mulvannon ordered them to put up their hands. Here's where accounts diverge. Sheriff Mulvannon's version, given at the grand jury hearing: Graham and Blevins tried to reach for their guns, forcing him and his posse to shoot them. The skeptical version: a posse, including Tewksbury allies, ambushed 2 Graham men and executed them under colour of law. Either way, John Graham and Charles Blevins lay dead. Tom Graham escaped. Was this law enforcement or assassination? Consider the posse included men who'd fought alongside the Tewksburys. They ambushed Graham and Blevins behind a stone wall. They claimed the men reached for their guns, the oldest justification in frontier justice. The phrase that's excused 1,000 murders. But no one was prosecuted. No investigation followed. The law had spoken with bullets, not warrants. John Graham, one of the original brothers who'd been invited to Pleasant Valley by Ed Tewksbury himself, who'd worked cattle alongside the Tewksburys, who'd been friends before they became enemies, dead at a place called Perkins Store. Charles Blevins, 4th son of Mark Blevins, to die violently killed alongside him. The Blevins family father disappeared, body never found. Hamp killed at Middleton Ranch. Andy, Sam Houston, And now Charles all dead within 3 weeks. Mrs. Blevins had lost her husband and 4 sons to Pleasant Valley. The Graham family, William dead at 18. John dead at Perkins' store. Only Tom remained, and he was running. While official law enforcement failed, unofficial law enforcement took over. Jesse Ellison, a tough, taciturn cattleman who'd moved into Arizona in 1885 with 2,000 head of cattle, led what was called the Vigilante Committee of 50. According to Bob Voris, whose memoirs weren't unsealed until many years after his death, this group, fast, grim, and deadly, soon became feared in Pleasant Valley as no other body was ever feared. In early November 1887, this vigilante committee hanged Al Rose at the Houdon Ranch. Al Rose was a Graham partisan. He'd been ordered by the committee to leave the valley because they knew he rustled horses, and he talked too much. He refused to leave, so they hanged him. No trial, no judge, no jury, just a rope and a tree, and the judgment of men who'd decided they were the law. His body left swinging as a message. August 1888, a year after the worst violence. 3 men, Scott, Stott, and Wilson, Graham faction, accused of rustling and of wounding a Tewksbury ally in an earlier fight. They were captured, taken to the Mogollon Rim, lynched. One account preserves this detail. Scott and Wilson pleaded for their lives. But Stott faced his assailants with curses and called each man by name. Stott knew who was killing him, called them out, cursed them even as they tightened the noose. Then they hanged him alongside the others, bodies left swinging from ponderosa pines as a warning. Tom Horn, the hired killer, the legend reportedly took part in this lynching, serving as deputy under lawman Glenn Reynolds. Over the next few years after 1887, several lynchings and unsolved murders of members of both factions took place, often committed by masked men. The war had evolved. No more face-to-face shootouts. Now it was masked riders in the night. Bodies found at dawn. Bullet holes in the back. No witnesses. No arrests. Widows and orphans left behind. By the end of 1888, every adult male in both families had been killed, except 2, Ed Tewksbury and Tom Graham. December 3rd, 1888. James Tewksbury, the deadliest gun of Pleasant Valley, died. Not from a bullet, not from an ambush, not from a rope, from tuberculosis. He was visiting a friend in Phoenix when his lungs finally gave out. He died coughing blood in a friend's house, far from the mountains he'd fought for, far from the brothers he'd avenged. Think about that irony. Jim Tewksbury survived ambushes, gunfights, years of violence. The man who'd sworn no one could kill his brother and live nearby. The man who'd killed how many enemies the number lost to history, but probably substantial given his reputation. And disease took him. Not violence, not revenge. Just the slow failure of lungs damaged by who knows what coal dust from his father's mining days. Gun smoke from too many battles. Stress and cold from years of sleeping in the mountains with a rifle in his arms. Always watching. Always waiting. He died at maybe 30 years old. The most dangerous man in Pleasant Valley, killed by microscopic bacteria he couldn't see, couldn't shoot, couldn't fight. The frontier had 1,000 ways to kill you. Sometimes the quietest were the most certain. Still, the war would continue, because Ed Tewksbury was alive, and Tom Graham was alive. And as long as both men breathed, Pleasant Valley wouldn't have peace. By 1889, the violence had mostly subsided. Not ended, just subsided. Occasional murders, suspicious disappearances, men who rode out and never rode back. But the all-out war, the multiple killings per month, the sieges and ambushes and lynchings, that was over. Tom Graham left Pleasant Valley, moved to Tempe, got married, tried to build a normal life. Ed Tewksbury remained, the last Tewksbury standing, watching the valley where his brothers had died, where his father was buried, where blood had soaked into the soil for years. For 3 years, 1889 to 1892, there was an uneasy peace. Tom Graham farmed wheat. Ed Tewksbury worked cattle. They stayed away from each other, lived separate lives. Maybe they thought it was over. Maybe they thought time had dulled the hate. They were wrong. Because on August 2nd, 1892, Ed Tewksbury decided that peace was over, that 3 years was long enough, that Tom Graham had gotten away with too much for too long. That justice delayed was not justice denied, just justice waiting for the right moment. And that moment had come. Tom Graham had gotten out, left Pleasant Valley in 1887, moved to Tempe, a small farming community 150 miles southwest, far from the mountains and the blood. On October 8th, 1887, he married Annie Melton. She was 17 years old, a Baptist minister's daughter. Tom was 33. They started a farm together. For nearly 5 years, Tom Graham lived like a normal man. He farmed. He was married. He attended church, his wife's Baptist congregation. He bought land, planted crops, raised a few head of cattle. He was building something. Not just a farm, a future. A life away from the violence. Maybe he thought he'd escaped. Maybe he thought the war was over. Maybe he thought Ed Tewksbury had forgotten. Tom Graham's life in Tempe: wake at dawn. Feed the horses and cattle. Work the fields, wheat or barley, crops that grew well in the Arizona heat. Come home to Annie making dinner. On Sundays, church. In the evenings, maybe they talked about children they'd have, about buying more land, about growing old together. Normal dreams, the kind of dreams that die hard when a man with a rifle has been waiting 5 years for his chance. There's a photograph of Tom Graham and Ed Tewksbury together taken before the war, when they were friends. Tom is on the left, Ed on his right. Both men stare at the camera with the flat, unsmiling expression common to 19th century photography. They look hard, weathered, competent, like men who knew how to survive in a hard place. One of them would survive, the other wouldn't. August 2nd, 1892, Monday morning. Tom Graham is 38 years old. He's been married almost 5 years. He's harvested his first crop of grain. He's loading barley onto his wagon, taking it to the Tempe flour mill to be processed. Ordinary work, ordinary day. Annie brings him coffee, maybe biscuits. They talk about ordinary things. The weather, the price of grain, whether they need to mend the fence on the north pasture. He climbs onto the wagon seat, takes the reins. The horses start forward. Double Buttes Road, approaching Tempe, desert scrubland, mesquite, creosote bush. August heat already building, probably into the 90s by mid-morning. Near the present location of Priest and Broadway Road's intersection that exists today, where thousands of people drive daily, unaware that Tom Graham bled to death there 133 years ago. In the brush beside the road, Ed Tewksbury and his brother-in-law John Rhodes. They've been waiting since before dawn, waiting for Tom Graham. Ed is 34 years old now. 5 years since his brother John was shot down at the ranch, his body left for hogs while his wife and children watched from the cabin. 5 years since his brother Jim died of tuberculosis, coughing blood in Phoenix. 5 years of survivors' guilt and grief, and the knowledge that Tom Graham walked away while his family died. Ed raises his weapon, a .45-90 Winchester rifle. Heavy rifle. Powerful. The kind of round that could drop a buffalo at 300 yards. The wagon draws even with their position. Ed aims at Tom Graham's back. Fires. Tom falls backward onto the grain, blood spreading across the barley he'd grown with his own hands. The horses startle but don't bolt, trained well enough to stand despite the gunshot. Witnesses come running. Molly Cummings. Others. They find Tom Graham dying on his wagon load of grain, blood soaking into the harvest. Before he dies, Tom says, "Ed Tewksbury. Ed shot me." Multiple witnesses hear this. Multiple witnesses confirm it. Tom Graham dies where he fell, blood soaking into the grain he'd grown, on the road to the life he'd tried to build. He'd escaped Pleasant Valley, but he hadn't escaped Ed Tewksbury. Ed Tewksbury shot an unarmed man in the back, a man hauling grain to market, a married man who'd left the war 5 years earlier. But consider what Ed Tewksbury had lost: his brother John, shot down in front of his wife and children, his body left for hogs; his brother Jim, dead from tuberculosis at 30; his brother Frank, dead from pneumonia contracted on the way to court; his family's shepherd, shot and killed in February 1887. 5 years of violence, 5 years of funerals. And Tom Graham, who'd killed that first shepherd, who'd participated in the ambush of John Tewksbury, had walked away to a normal life. Marriage, farm, future. Is it murder when you kill the man who killed your family? Or is it just very, very delayed self-defense? The law would have to decide. Ed Tewksbury surrendered, didn't run, didn't hide in the mountains like he had after William Graham's death. He walked into custody, proclaiming his innocence, fearing a lynching. Lawman. Henry Garfias met him at the Kyrene Railroad station, and they rode quietly into Phoenix, where he was booked in the county jail. John Rhodes was tried first, and his trial became a sensation, but not for the testimony. Annie Graham, Tom's widow, slipped a pistol into the courtroom in her purse. Picture the scene: courtroom packed with spectators, Rhodes standing as the verdict is read. Annie Graham sits in the gallery, young woman, maybe 22 now, widow for less than a year. Her husband shot in the back while hauling grain. She reaches into her purse, grabs the pistol, her dead husband's .38 revolver. Stands, aims at Rhodes's back, pulls the trigger. The hammer catches on the fabric of her purse. Misfire. Men grab her, disarm her. She's screaming words lost to history, but the grief isn't. The rage isn't. Rhodes's case was dismissed for lack of evidence. The judge ruled his alibi that he was elsewhere was conclusive. Ed Tewksbury's preliminary hearing, December 5th, 1892. Molly Cummings provided a moment of high drama. She pointed to Tewksbury and said, "That is the man," a woman identifying Tom Graham's killer. No hesitation, no doubt. The case moved to trial. Ed's attorneys moved for a change of venue. They argued he couldn't get a fair trial in Maricopa County. The judge agreed. September 10th, 1893. Judge Richard E. Sloan ordered the trial moved to Tucson. Ed's defense counsel, Tom Fitch, the same lawyer who defended the Earps, and Doc Holliday in the OK Corral shootout hearing. If you needed a lawyer for a Western gunfight case, Tom Fitch was your man. December 14th, 1893. The trial opened in Tucson under District Judge J. D. Bethune. Within a week, the jury received the case. After 2 days of deliberation, guilty verdict. Ed Tewksbury convicted of murdering Tom Graham. First-degree murder, penalty death, or life in prison. But Tom Fitch wasn't done. He moved that the verdict be thrown out on a legal technicality. Ed Tewksbury had never offered a plea at the start of trial. Think about that. The entire trial witness testimony, jury deliberations, guilty verdict, all invalid because of a procedural error. Ed hadn't formally entered a plea of not guilty on the record. The judge granted Fitch's motion. The conviction was overturned. Ed Tewksbury got a new trial. The second trial result was a hung jury. The jury couldn't agree. After 2.5 years behind bars, Ed was free on bond. In 1895, the case was dismissed. Ed Tewksbury walked free. Annie Graham had tried to kill one of his murderers in court and failed. She watched the legal system convict Ed Tewksbury, then overturn the conviction, then fail to convict him again. She never remarried. In one of history's bitter ironies, Ed Tewksbury became a lawman in Globe, Arizona. The man who'd killed multiple people, who'd been convicted then freed of murder, who'd survived the bloodiest range war in American history, he became a peace officer. On his return to Globe, Tewksbury married Brawley Lopez. They had 4 children. Ed worked as a lawman, kept the peace, but he was in failing health from illness contracted during 3 years in Tucson jails. The jails of 1890s Arizona Territory were death traps. No sanitation. Tuberculosis spread like wildfire. Ed Tewksbury died in Globe, Arizona, in April 1904. He was 46 years old. Cause of death: tuberculosis, the same disease that killed his brother Jim. The community of Globe held a dance, and the proceeds were turned over to his widow and 4 children. Edwin Tewksbury was the last survivor. He outlived them all, and carried the weight of Pleasant Valley to his grave. Today, the graves of many of the murdered men can still be seen in the Young, Arizona, Cemetery. John Tewksbury, William Jacobs, others whose names time has weathered from the stones, letters fading under a century of sun and wind and snow. And the Perkins store still stands as a museum, the place where John Graham and Charles Blevins were shot down by Sheriff Mulvernan's posse. You can walk through it, touch the walls, stand where men died. The John Tewksbury Senior Cabin, an 1880 log cabin with gun ports, is preserved at the Pioneer Living History Museum in Phoenix. You can visit it, touch the logs, see the gun ports cut into the walls, stand in the room where the Tewksbury family lived, ate, slept, planned revenge. In 1988, Q Ranch owner Jefferson Jack Rogers donated the structure to the museum. It's all that remains of the Flying V Ranch. In Young, Arizona, there's a historical marker, erected in 2008 by Lost Dutchman 5917+4. Eclampus Vitus and the Pleasant Valley Historical Society. It reads, "One of the West's longest and bloodiest feuds took place here and around Pleasant Valley. The Grahams and the Tewksburys had been in the cattle business, and it seems probable that they first fell out over the division of cattle they jointly owned. Some believe stole. Historians still debate the details of the feud that included brand changing, cattle and horse rustling, ambushes, murder, vigilantes, and lynching, but it is well known that as many as 20 men lay dead by its conclusion. 20 men. The marker is conservative. The real number is higher. The Pleasant Valley War gave Arizona Territory a reputation for not being ready for statehood, which would not occur until 1912. Arizona historian Marshall Trimble explained, "With the Apache Wars, the shootout at the OK Corral, the outlaws, Pleasant Valley War, all gave Arizona the reputation as a wild place, not ready for statehood. And the eastern states didn't like the idea of having 2 new senators from a place still unsettled. They figured they'd probably send a couple of gun-toting cowboys." One account states, "The nation at large was so shocked and revolted by what went on: lynchings, killing children, bodies disemboweled, corpses left for wild pigs to feed on, and more, that it delayed the granting of statehood to the Arizona Territory for more than 2 decades. Congress looked at Pleasant Valley and said, 'These people aren't civilized enough to be part of the Union.' 25 years, from 1887 to 1912. A generation of Arizonans denied full citizenship because of what happened in a single valley over a few years. Final death toll between 35 and 50 people. The range exists because some bodies were never found. Some killings were never reported. Some people disappeared into the wilderness and maybe died of natural causes. Maybe died of bullets, we'll never know. Of all the feuds that have taken place throughout American history, the Pleasant Valley War was the most costly, resulting in an almost complete annihilation of the 2 families involved. Graham family, Thomas Graham, dead. Murdered, 1892. John Graham, dead. Killed by posse, 1887. William Graham, dead. Shot, 1887. Age 18. Samuel Graham, patriarch, died earlier. Natural causes. Tewksbury family, Frank Tewksbury, dead. Pneumonia, 1884. Age 22. John Tewksbury Sr., dead. Ambushed, 1887. James Tewksbury, dead. Tuberculosis, 1888. Edwin Tewksbury, survived until 1904. Tuberculosis, age 46. Blevins family, Martin Blevins, disappeared 1887. Body never found. Hampton Blevins, dead. Middleton Ranch, 1887. Andy Blevins, dead. Owens Shootout, 1887. Sam Houston Blevins, dead. Owens Shootout, 1887. Charles Blevins, dead. Perkins Store, 1887. John Blevins, wounded Owens Shootout, killed later. Others, William Jacobs, dead. Ambushed with John Tewksbury, 1887. John Payne, dead. Middleton Ranch, 1887. Moses Roberts, dead. Owens Shootout, 1887. Al Rose, lynched 1887. Scott, Stott, Wilson, lynched 1888. Henry Middleton, murdered 1887. George Newton, disappeared 1892, plus 20 to 35 others whose names are lost. The people left behind: Annie Graham, Tom's widow, tried to shoot his killer in court, lived in Tempe the rest of her life, died decades later, never remarried, carrying the weight of watching her husband's killer walk free. Lydia Tewksbury, John's widow, buried her husband while gunmen watched and hogs approached, raised Parker, age 6, and Walter, age 3, alone, her fate unknown, her first name unrecorded by history. Eva Blevins, John's wife, was in the house during the Owens shootout with her infant son, heard her husband and brothers-in-law killed within 60 seconds, her fate unknown. Mrs. Blevins lost her husband Mart, who disappeared and was never found, lost 5 sons: Hampton, Andy, John, Sam Houston, and Charles. 4 of them died within 6 weeks of each other. Watched her family annihilated. Brawley Tewksbury, Ed's wife, widow at her husband's death in 1904, left with 4 children and proceeds from a community dance held by sympathetic neighbours, and countless others, mothers, sisters, daughters who watched men they loved ride away and never return. The children who grew up without fathers: Parker and Walter Tewksbury, ages 6 and 3 when they watched their father killed from the cabin window. Thomas Schultes, age 12 when he testified at the coroner's inquest about seeing his stepfather murdered, bullets striking within 2 feet of him. John Blevins' infant son, present during the Owens shootout. Ed Tewksbury's 4 children, raised by a mother whose husband died from illness, contracted in jail. And how many others? 20, 30, 50 children who grew up knowing their fathers died violently over cattle, sheep, and pride. Arizona State University historian Eduardo Pagan studied the Pleasant Valley War extensively. He concluded, "What it is in my mind is a darker story about the settling of the American West than what we've often told ourselves. This is a story of a small community that cracked and turned on itself within this pressure cooker of violence. 18 men in the Pleasant Valley War lost their lives violently, and of those who survived the conflict, some were permanently disabled. The constant exposure to violence and death left a profound emotional impact." Western author Zane Grey wrote a novel based on the Pleasant Valley War, To the Last Man, a story of the Pleasant Valley War. In his novel, the families were renamed Isbell and Jorth. Grey changed the details, romanticized the violence, turned it into entertainment. The book became a bestseller. It was adapted into films including a 1933 Paramount Pictures movie and the 1992 TV movie Gunsmoke to the Last Man. The Pleasant Valley War became legend, a cautionary tale, proof of the Wild West's brutality. But legends simplify. They turn complex men into heroes and villains. They erase the moral ambiguity, the economic desperation, the systemic failures that made the violence feel inevitable. The real story is messier, more human, more tragic. So let's ask the questions we've been avoiding. Was Ed Tewksbury a murderer? Yes. He shot Tom Graham in the back, killed William Graham, or stood by while others did. Participated in a war that left dozens dead, some of them teenagers, some of them bystanders. Was Ed Tewksbury a son defending his family's honor after watching them systematically destroyed? Also yes, his brother John murdered in front of his family, his brother Jim dead from disease, his family's shepherd killed, his father's name dragged through courts, Was Tom Graham a brutal killer who shot a man and maybe beheaded him? If the sources are accurate, yes. Was Tom Graham a desperate rancher defending his livelihood against sheep he believed would destroy the range? Also, yes. The uncomfortable truth is, both things can be true simultaneously. And that's the most disturbing part of this story, because it forces us to ask questions we'd rather avoid. Where is the line between justice and revenge? Tom Graham killed the Tewkesbury shepherd in February 1887. Ed Tewkesbury killed Tom Graham in August 1892, 5 years later. Is 5 years' patience justice? Or is it just revenge that waited for its moment when the law is 100 miles and 3 days away? What do you do when someone destroys your livelihood? The Tewkesburys couldn't call the police. The sheriff didn't have resources. The courts threw out cases for lack of evidence. So what do you do? Accept the loss or enforce your own justice? Is there honor in violence? Both families believed they were defending their honor, fighting for their families, standing up to injustice. But honor left 35 to 50 people dead and 2 families annihilated. Or does violence destroy the very thing it claims to protect? The Tewkesburys defended their family honor by getting most of their family killed. The Grahams defended their livelihood by losing their lives. What did the honor cost? Everything. How many deaths does it take before we realize the cost of settling things our way is everything? The Pleasant Valley War ended 133 years ago. But the questions it raises haven't gone away. Rural America still struggles. Economies still collapse. Families still face impossible choices when systems fail them. And when people feel abandoned by authorities that should protect them, they still take matters into their own hands. Every year, somewhere in America, someone decides the law has failed them, decides honor matters more than life, decides their family's survival justifies violence. The weapons change, the locations change, the specific grievances change, but the story stays the same: desperation, betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, loss that ripples through generations. 35 to 50 people died in Pleasant Valley. The exact number lost to history. Both families were nearly annihilated. For what? Cattle-rustling accusations that were probably true on both sides. Sheep crossing an invisible line. Pride. Honor. The refusal to back down. Was it worth it? Ask Lydia Tewkesbury. Ask Annie Graham. Ask the children. Ask Ed Tewkesbury, dying at 46, knowing he was the last man standing in a war nobody won. The answer is obvious, but that doesn't stop it from happening again. Because human nature being what it is, we keep believing, this time will be different. This time, violence will solve the problem. This time, I'm justified. It never is. It never does. You never are. These stories aren't just history. They're warnings.